Okay, so today we're going to take a little break on typical Lenten themes, and instead we're going to get into a bit of ancient history. Because between the first reading and the Gospel, we heard some big names today. In the Gospel, Jesus is visited by Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets revealed by their top representatives. And the first reading was all about Abraham, essentially our patriarch of faith. Abraham is a major person to understand in terms of Western religion. Jews, Muslims, and Christians are all considered to be the major Western monotheistic religions. They are also sometimes called the religions of the book because all three acknowledge the importance of sacred scripture, although there is some disagreement about which books count and which ones don't. The other umbrella term that you may hear now again is the Abrahamic faiths, because Jews, Muslims, and Christians all consider Abraham to be the first solid figure in history that we can trace our faith back to. Before Abraham, we had Adam and Eve, then Cain and Abel and Seth. While later, we had Noah. And then after a few more generations, we get Abraham. Abraham leads to Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. By that time, the 12 Hebrew tribes were formed or forming, as Jacob had 12 sons. And after Joseph brings the family to Egypt, the stage is set for Moses and everything else that happens in or after the book of Exodus. So Abraham isn't literally the first guy in the Bible or anything like that, but he started the idea of maintaining continuation of God's presence in the family. We do consider him the first patriarch of the faith, and we would call that tradition today, capital T. That's not really what we get from Adam or Eve or Noah. Abraham means father of a multitude. He was probably born about 4,000 years ago in the place we now consider Iraq. And I'd like to read you something directly from the book Who's Who in the Bible. They say it better than I can. I don't want to paraphrase it. Yet this towering figure of Abraham is frankly portrayed in the Old Testament as a flawed, contradictory human being whose personal struggle is a profound and often surprising spiritual drama. Sometimes impatient and deceitful, Abraham comes only slowly to full realization of the true nature of the Lord's revelations and promises to him and his descendants. Well said, who's who in the Bible. So what we have here is this man from ancient history. On the one hand, he's considered practically our earliest model of a guy with pure, perfect faithfulness in God and God alone. And yet he is also deeply human and therefore deeply flawed. And he's kind of a slow learner. Or at least he's slow to fully understand what God's been telling him. And that's something vital for us to focus on here. Abraham is a classic biblical figure who shows that the Bible is not boring. I mean, some of it's boring. Some of it is an ancient law textbook. Those are always boring. But the Bible as a whole is not boring or dry reading. It is hard to read because it's an ancient book and therefore was written in a different style than we're accustomed to. But the Bible is a drama, a God drama, if you will. Abraham alone has a ton of things to work out and struggle with. He was semi-nomadic. He traveled hundreds of miles to find a new home for his family. He had to cope with the possibility of not having children. And that was a huge disaster for people back then. Not having children was the same thing as being cursed. Then, once he did have a son, Isaac, he's tested by God and told to sacrifice him. We don't have time to get into that whole thing. The point I'm making today is this. Abraham is the first perfectly human religious role model in our Western culture. He wanted to be a good father and be true to God and find his place in the world. His story, his drama, with respect to all of that, was long and difficult. He was heroic at times. He was anti-heroic at other times. But in the end, God does promise him that his descendants will be as numerous as the stars. And those descendants, if you count his spiritual descendants, as St. Paul insisted, that means all Jews, Christians, and Muslims are his spiritual children, whether we're related to him by blood or not. We look to him as a forefather of faith. And we need to respect that and identify with people like him. Abraham, along with Moses, Ezekiel, St. Peter, St. Paul, St. Augustine, and so many others. I'm not talking about people who were flawless, like Jesus or an angel. If everyone in the Bible was flawless, it would be boring to read. I'm talking about people who struggled and wrestled with life, complete with setbacks and confusions and frustrations. Their life stories involved betrayal, war, doubt, starvation, hardship, and difficult choices. You know what that sounds like to me? Your life. Okay, maybe not the starvation or the war so much. Most of us are profoundly lucky in more ways than one. But none of us, as far as I can tell, none of us is so lucky that our life is free of the turmoil and work that involves and encompasses almost every life. A path of betrayal, hardships, difficult choices, and setbacks is the path to God. It's the narrow way, not the easy way. Because the easy way, ironically, doesn't actually go anywhere. You end up in the same basic state that you left. And when we are willing to learn from the Bible, such as the stories of Abraham, we start to learn about ourselves and our humanity. Because Abraham was deeply human, in good ways and bad ways. But he always walked in the light of God. And of course, with Jesus and the Transfiguration, our gospel today, we see Jesus being backed up by all those folks. We see Moses and Elijah. Those are the two big names. But the others are there just out of sight. I'm talking about Abraham, Noah, Joshua, Ezekiel, Jeremiah. Jesus is bringing all this together and presenting it to his Father, which is also our Father. Nothing in the past has ever happened for no reason. I'm sorry if that was bad grammar. Everything in the past has happened for a reason. The past matters. And every life that has come before Christ was taken up by him, and every life that comes after him is called to follow him wherever he may lead us. But no matter what, you can be sure that he is calling us, like he called Abraham, along the narrow way, for that leads to God and our heavenly homeland.